How many of you taking refuge first time tomorrow? And then how many of you already have the refuge? It should be everybody else. So so those of us that already have it, we can refresh. We can always refresh the intention and the aspiration, and use the ceremony to reassert our commitment, and then also to rejoice in those that are coming into the stream. So the reason that I took a little time to, in a playful way, just do the 12 links yesterday was in preparation for a particular connection that I like to set up for understanding refuge in a more psychological way. Obviously, the refuge, from a cultural standpoint, refuge is maybe more of a religious commitment, going to the Buddha himself. And in a way, if you were to ask a regular Thai person, maybe a Sri Lankan person, there may be that kind of cultural sense that they're going to the Buddha in almost in the way that maybe in monotheism we would approach Christ or seeking refuge in God in a way. There may be some of that just as a kind of from a lay point of view. As if somehow like praying to the Buddha will bestow some good blessings. But I think for those that have studied a little bit, then they know from what Upal was saying, really the spirit of it is that you have to become a lamp for yourself. That the Buddha can't put his hands on you and wash you clean with water, wash away your sins, or intervene on your behalf, or help you ascend, or bestow some sort of blessing on you. So really the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is what you take refuge in a way. When you become a Buddhist, when you take refuge, you're not taking in refuge in the Buddha as a being who can save you. You're taking refuge in the Buddha as a potentiality that exists in your own mind, the potential in your own mind to awaken. And that potentiality doesn't get activated or manifested until an insight takes place. And that insight is what is represented by the Dharma or the Dhamma. So you will take refuge in three objects of refuge. They're called the triple gem or the three jewels. What you will take refuge in is the Buddha as a principle of potentiality in each of our minds. So it's in a way, it's acknowledging that you innately have this capacity to awaken. It's not reserved for a few scholars. It's not reserved for any particular ethnic group or cultural orientation or time period or socioeconomic class. It's a potentiality that exists for all of us. But that potentiality lays latent unless it is accessed or manifest. And how does it get manifested is the second refuge. The second refuge being the actual teachings of the Buddha. And more than just the teachings of the Buddha, the enactment or the living the teachings of the Buddha is what that refuge is. And more than even just the teachings and living the teachings is the realization or the final fruition of those teachings. So in a way, that is the ultimate refuge. So you can think of the Buddha as your potentiality, and you can think of the refuge of the Dharma as in actualizing your potentiality. And then what comes to assist you in that process of actualizing your potentiality is the Sangha. And the Sangha, most of us associate with just the community of like-minded people that we're surrounded with, which is incredibly important. But actually the Sanghas, the preservers, so the monastic monks and nuns who maintain the Vinaya or the code of ethics. And in a way, they are the embodiment of they are the ambassadors or representatives of maintaining a particular kind of lineage that keeps the teachings alive. That's why you'll find people bowing to the monks and the nuns, because without them, there's a very beautiful interdependence that happens between the laity, people like us, and the monks and nuns, because without them, the lineages would die off. On the other hand, without us, we would the monks and nuns would not be able to sustain themselves. So that's a beautiful interdependence between laity and monastic. So the three jewels, you'll hear about the three jewels, you'll hear about the triple gem. So I guess my hope is that you won't necessarily see them as a kind of artifact, like the Buddha out there, his teachings out there, and the community of monks out there, but more as a psychological potentiality in your mind and your ability to actually realize something. So each of you will have to realize something in order to taste some sense of freedom, whether it be a small little moment of freedom or a much more pervasive type of freedom. Okay, so I want to just return back a little bit to the 12 links, and then go from the 12 links to the Eightfold Path, and then make the connection with the vows that you're actually going to take. But before I do, this is the when we were at the Alua Vihara. I told you the story of the monk that gave some partial transmission of the first teaching of the Buddha, what's called the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. So this is the actual text he read from. So in a way, these are the words of the Buddha, and particularly the most pith teaching on gaining freedom. So I just want to pass this around. So one of the things I think is so important when we try to practice and understand these principles is to make them as relevant and as practical as possible. I think that we all appreciated Upal's treatment of mindfulness teachings because they were very, very present and relevant to what's actually happening in any given moment, whatever is arising. It didn't seem to me that, and I know this from personal experience with his teacher, Godwin, our teacher, Godwin never really gave teachings that were of high philosophy. He was a teacher that would sit down, we would meditate together, and then his teachings were based on the conversation that was happening live. So people's questions made the teachings. And so that meant that there was an incredible immediacy to what was happening. There was no sense in giving a teaching that wasn't relevant to what was happening in the room and for people. And so it's incredible, right? And so he would allow people to have an experience in their meditation, and then he would elicit certain questions, and those questions he would meet them just as they were. And I think Upal demonstrated that in the class. It was a beautiful session in the sun coming through Sonata Soya, and then Upal was basically just in his own human way, just meeting us mind by mind and question by question. And so I guess we did a little bit the 12 links yesterday, but I want to say that you should by now be very familiar with the kinds of patterns and conditionings that bring distress to your life. And if you're not clear, then the jump to taking refuge and the jump to putting into practice the teachings is quite a wide gap. But the more clear you are about, I would say 1, 2, or even 3 very, very prominent conditions or patterns of tendencies in your mind, habitual tendencies, we can call them, klishas, the more meaningful your practice will be, because the teachings then have a platform to situate themselves. They have an actual context in your actual life. And more than that, then the actual refuge ceremony will be a kind of commitment, in the way that I understand it, a real commitment to working with the habits of your mind that are creating distress and suffering. So that's how I want to frame refuge tomorrow, is once you have refuge every day, and even 6 times a day, they're asking you to make a particular strong effort in redirecting the course of your consciousness. So that's how I see what a Buddhist practitioner is: someone who's invested in redirecting their evolution. And that's why I called the first course that we did together, Master Your Becoming, because it's putting you in the driver's seat of your own mind. And if you'll remember Upal talking about the boat out at sea with no compass and no captain and no bearing. So do take a moment right now to think about a period in your life. It might be just very accessible and close, or it could be a long time ago, where you had no refuge. You had no direction. You were following the mandate of your culture, which was essentially convincing you that the route to take was one of hedonism or indulgence of material wealth, success, fame, pleasure. And you had in some way, probably in a way, mastered that. You had as many pleasures as you could possibly obtain. You found your way to a faculty position or a CEO position or some moment of stature or reputation, and yet you still felt yourself to be empty or dissatisfied, still yearning, still hungry. And then at some point, and I don't know when that was for you, but each one of you probably remember when it was and exactly when it was, where it was. There was an alternative offered to you about what reality is all about, what your life is all about. Does everybody remember that for themselves? That moment? That may have been the first time that you heard a Buddhist teaching or did mindfulness or something like that, or maybe you came by way of the yoga tradition, or someone gave you a book. In my case, I was 16 and I got that book, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. I don't know what it was for you, but that was a light bulb moment, and these moments, they changed the course of the trajectory of your life. So 12 links of dependent origination basically are the Buddha's explanation of how do you explain the distress that we're currently in. It's not random that we get triggered and our emotions fire. And because our emotions are firing, we then act out of them impulsively. And the problem is it doesn't just end there. No moment of habitual reaction just ends there. It looks like it ends there, but actually what's happening is something is being set up for a future moment. And you didn't just arrive here randomly having a triggered moment. You arrived here because of where you have been, and whatever happens in a present moment then carries you forward into the future. And so in a way, the past, present, and future are in a way already dictated. It's already conditioned, and we're bound in a particular kind of way. We're bound as long as we remain asleep. The mechanism is going to repeat itself or replicate itself over and over and over again. That syndrome is called what? That is called samsara. So samsara is not a place. Samsara is a state of mind that is deeply ingrained in a habitual tendency and being led by delusion or blindness. So the 12 links of dependent origination at 12 o'clock start with that very blindness, the fact that we are constantly reifying objects, self and other, not seeing things clearly, and as a result of that, the legacy and the ancestry of imprints in our mind get calcified. And we bring that onto the stage in a present moment. And so consciousness is already conditioned. And then from consciousness comes mind and body. And mind and body has 6 sense doors. And so we are constantly receiving sense stimuli from the outside and the inside. And the moment that sense stimuli fires, there's a moment of contact. And the 4 dominoes that proceed from contact are contact,
sensation, urge, action.
Okay, and then action just doesn't, the domino effect doesn't stop there. Action leads to and becoming is a kind of way of saying personality trait. So in a way, once you get to, and I believe that personality trait was Dion last night, wasn't it? So when you get to Dion, you have already followed a railroad track that confirms a kind of identity or a kind of belief about yourself or the world. It is the sum total of a legacy that's coming through the present moment and arriving at a kind of sense of calcification. And by then it's too late. And so you have already then colored the last two links. So link 11 is what? And the birth is happening in a future moment. And then birth is succeeded by death. So you now have the 12 links of dependent origination, delusion, imprints, consciousness, mind, body, six senses, contact, sensation, urge, action, becoming, birth, and death. Good. So this is basically the Buddha's great contribution, is that he was basically saying your life is not random. Nothing is random. If you're walking to the dinner table last night and you get lost, like I did about 13 times in the last. And what happens if you can't find Arena? And what happens if you don't have service? And what happens when you don't have a lamp and it's midnight?
Or 5:20 a.m. and there's no electricity, you can't see anything.
So then that's the moment of contact, because you're being assailed by sense stimulation and thoughts, and then from contact comes sensation. And it may be that you're feeling anger or your frustration or despair. Okay, anything you can do about the despair in the moment?
No.
And then from despair, then you might
Have an urge. Call out.
You have an urge. Well, however you protect yourself from whatever feelings that you have has been put in place long ago and oiled like a machine until it becomes automatic. So really the Buddha's teachings are about becoming unautomated, which is why I think Upal's teaching was so beautiful, because he was talking about the mechanistic way that we're living. But one of the things that Upal really didn't flesh out because he didn't have time was he was really talking about the primacy of attention, which I think the mindfulness revolution has really encouraged people to see the vitality and the importance of de-automatizing our life through the practice of mindfulness. But there are two other very vital variables in not only reversing the cycle of stress, but breaking it entirely, because the other thing the Buddha was talking about, that is awareness in itself is not sufficient for liberation. So when we go through the Four Noble Truths, is what you're really taking refuge in. You are taking refuge in the very truth that you are in an existential predicament. We're all in agreement of that? Mm-hmm. And this existential predicament isn't random, and nor is it the consequence of a divine being that has damned you to hell, in other words. It is a product of a psychological legacy that gets enacted unconsciously. Do you follow?
Yes.
So that is the second noble truth. The third noble truth is because it's conditioned, that is, because death is conditioned by birth, and birth is conditioned by becoming, and becoming is conditioned by
Action.
and action is conditioned by, and urge is conditioned by,
Sensation.
and sensation is conditioned by,
Contact.
and contact is conditioned by, six senses are conditioned by, mind, body is conditioned by, consciousness is conditioned by, imprints are conditioned by. Because it is conditioned in that way, it can be undone. That's the good news of the third noble truth. If it were fate, if it were destiny, if it were the product of a divine being, or if it were random, we would have no hope of intervening in it. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. So this is the Buddha's second and third noble truth are really, they at the time they were revolutionary, because they were essentially saying it's our responsibility that we're in our own predicament But the good news is because we're creating it, we can undo it and recreate it. So when you take refuge, you are taking refuge in your own ability, your own agency. Mm-hmm. You're saying, I'm no longer going to be a child. I'm no longer going to be a victim. I'm no longer going to be a bystander. I'm going to be the master or the captain or the lighthouse of my own life. So that's actually a very profound thing. I mean, I can remember countless teachings from Geshe Tenzin Zopa and Lama Zopa Rinpoche where they talk about just even having that as an option in your life is, by its very nature, indicative of a tremendous amount of merit accrued in a prior lifetime. To even have the opportunity that we do right now, to be sitting here, to have interest in these kinds of things, to have enough good fortune and resources, to have enough health and vitality, to have the context, sitting amongst not one, not two, but hundreds of holy relics and sacred spaces, is an unfathomable bounty of blessing, incalculable, ineffable. So do take a moment and breathe that in, that this is not random, what you're doing here. This is in itself the result of countless lifetimes of effort, of meeting the Dharma, of doing good works and good deeds, of accruing an ocean of merit to put you in a position where you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into your mind till you uncover the very root, the very source of the distress-making mechanism so that you can liberate yourself. And so this is incredible fortune that we're sharing together. So the Buddha's fourth noble truth is the path, and we all know the Eightfold Path can be condensed into 3 principles. And those 3 principles I would like for you to really reflect on deeply, because they are your tools for directing and steering and course correcting your evolution. So not only do you have to have a concept of your potentiality and also very clear about your pattern and your conditioning, but what do I have to do to make or create a fork in the road? Do you follow? So we've been emphasizing in the morning the mindfulness, and Upal was very, very good about showing the power of mindfulness, because it's almost like a lever or a leverage. Without mindfulness, without awareness, the train is just going down the track and the dominoes are falling, right? Mm-hmm. So once you hit contact and sensation, without mindfulness, sensation will automatically lead to urge, and urge automatically lead to action. But with mindfulness, there's the ability to create a gap. And the gap that we're normally working in is between where and where? Urge and action, okay? So do kindly think of like something in the vicinity of the last few days where you had urge action. Something unpleasant happened, there was an urge, and you have a go-to strategy. That go-to strategy has been there and is there for a purpose, is probably a survival mechanism that you developed a long time ago. Or maybe that was one given to you. Are you there? Mm-hmm. Everybody there? Take a minute to think about it. One thing in your life, one pattern in your life where you feel most stuck, where the groove is really deep, and without much attention, it's a fait accompli. You're going right down that trajectory, and you know where it goes. It doesn't end good. Are you there?
Yes.
So, of the 3 principles that represent the path to liberation, one is awareness. If there's not awareness, there's no ability to forge a new trajectory. But if there is awareness, there are 2 more very vital principles. one is wisdom, and one is virtue. And both require, in a way, separate kinds of cultivations. In fact, all three of them require separate cultivations. And in a way, this pilgrimage encapsulates all of them. We do them. We're studying, we're practicing, and we're making offerings. So the offerings that we do is the practice of what? And the meditations that we do and the chanting that we do is what? That's awareness.
Oh.
And the contemplation that we do and the dialogue that we do and the examination that we do and the reflection that we do and the digging that we do and the probing that we do, that is all part of wisdom. So what we try to aspire for is a very complete, comprehensive path. And you can see, in contrast to secular mindfulness, you can go to a yoga center, you can go to a meditation center, you can get very, very good at relaxing your mind and becoming aware. But if you don't talk about how to redirect your attention, you don't talk about the investigation or the analysis into the apparatus or the mechanism in your mind that's creating destruction, then that practice is, in a way, is not capable of liberation. It's not to say that it's not potent. It's not to say that it doesn't have health benefits. This is to say that it is insufficient for liberation. So when you take refuge tomorrow, you're basically someone who's saying, I want liberation. Do you want liberation?
Yes.
Can I ask you, is it only liberation on an individual level, or also can we also talk about liberation on a collective consciousness level as well?
It's a good question. We can ask the monks how that fits in. My own personal understanding is that the early teachings are really about liberating yourself, with the understanding that everybody has to do that for themselves. Whereas the Mahayana vision is that you still can't liberate someone else, but you actually use your relationships and your wish for your path. It's like taking the group as your vehicle. So, I mean, sometimes people confuse the Mahayana as I'm seeking liberation for others, but really I'm using the path of relationships to create my own conditions for my own liberation. And then there is this extra mile to the journey, which is not just about liberation, but to Buddhahood. And we can ask Chandama and the monks tomorrow, but my understanding is that they don't emphasize that as a possibility to become full Buddha, what's called Samyak Sambuddha. The end of the path is to be liberated, is Nibbana. The end of self-imposed suffering, the end of the kind of blindness that would perpetuate the wheel of samsara. So you can stop suffering from happening, and that would be liberation. But the extra mile is to accrue what are called the masses of virtue, or the collection of merit and wisdom, to create the conditions to create the body and mind of a Buddha. So that's what really the Mahayana emphasizes. In order to get that collection, that vast collection of compassion and wisdom, you must develop compassion. And in order to develop compassion, you have to be in relationship with others who are suffering. So that extra mile really sees the path as being one of relationship. It's relational. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful thing tomorrow that you've elected in your life to take full responsibility for the infinite, countless manifestations of death and rebirth, to finally make an orientation and to have the conditions available for you to finally be liberated. If not in this lifetime, once you take refuge, they say that it's inevitably in the future that will be your final purpose. So we have wisdom, ethics, and meditation. So basically, if you're becoming a Buddhist and you're taking refuge, you don't believe in the Four Noble Truths. It would make no sense to believe in the Four Noble Truths, right? Just reading the text and having someone talk to you about it and it sounding nice and it resonating is insufficient. So we can go to as many teachings, and we should go to as many teachings with His Holiness and with Geshe Tenzin Zopa and with this one and that one. But in itself, it's not going to do much. It's up to each one of us to actually live the teachings, enact the teachings, put them into practice. So one way that I have come to understand refuge and why I wanted to spend as much time as I did on the links of dependent origination is this. When your train is coming down the track and the dominoes are falling one by one and the destiny the groove of the destiny of your development is already put in place and it's well oiled, and you have a moment of mindfulness and you create a gap between urge and action with your awareness, and you see deeply into your conditioned patterning, and you recognize that that's not you. You don't have to go that way. And then you choose to do your life differently. You follow me? That moment of doing your life differently, that is refuge. Refuge is not a ceremony. Refuge is not the Sangye Chodan Sokne Chonam La or the Namo. The chants are not refuge. The scriptures are not refuge. The Dharma talks are not refuge. The refuge happens when every fiber in your being wants to go down a particular kind of groove and you have enough presence in your mind to make a difference or make a choice, and you actually choose something different. Now that's why the teachings on virtue are so profound, because they offer the alternative. So tomorrow they're going to give you 5 precepts. These are your alternatives or your commitments or your vows to living differently, to abstaining from the kinds of activities that we normally take in knee-jerk reactivity, and to choose something more virtuous, thus setting in motion a completely new life. And again, here I like to make them as practical and as personal as you can make them, because they're often offered in a very general way. We know the 5 precepts, right? Let's go through them. The first one is no killing. Okay, what if I don't think there are any mass murderers amongst us, but I could be wrong. But you so you can imagine that each of these 5 precepts are on a spectrum. And you can start, you remember in grad school or in college, you may have taken an ethics class and there's never a clear answer. There are always grays, various stages of gray. And all those various stages of gray are often contextualized. So it's never clear cut and easy. That's a better way to start getting your mind wrapped around how to live from the precepts. You may inevitably have to break them, but a lot of them will depend on your intentionality and the circumstance and choosing the lesser of the evil, for example. And then how, there's often when they teach karma, they teach each karma's not a thing. Karma can be subdivided into 4 parts. There's the object, the intention, the action, and the completion. Say them with me. Object, intention, action, and completion. So let's use an example. The example that they give in the text sometimes is someone finds a wallet on the ground. It's actually another monk's robes on the ground, but for us, a wallet. You find a wallet. So the object is always another human being. So the object would be the owner of that wallet that you find on the ground. And the intention is, should I take it for my own benefit? The action would be taking it. This is if you're stealing.
Right.
The action would be taking it, putting it in your own pocket.
Right.
And the completion would actually be either your satisfaction in that or the other person's disappointment that they lost their wallet and couldn't retrieve it. Do you follow? So you need all four of those variables or conditions to have a full karmic ripening. And sometimes you don't get all four of them. And the same is true in a positive. If you spin it from a negative to a positive, you always need an object, an intention, an action, and a completion. So I'm bringing this up just to show that the precept of killing, for example, you can have the object, an insect. I remember when I was 20 at Kopan, I was shaving in Asia. There's often ants circling the sink. And Lama Zopa had given the precepts, and the next morning I was shaving, and I saw those ants around the sink, and I was going to wash them down the sink. And then the mindfulness was there, and the recognition that even any sentient being, I shouldn't kill any sentient being. Okay? And then the action would then be to be very diligent about avoiding flushing one of those little creatures down the pipe. Right? And then the completion is that one of those little creatures got away, walked away. So sometimes you don't get the benefit of all four, but just recognize that there's degrees to every kind of karmic activity. So the precept of killing can be viewed all the way from not killing a human being all the way to micro violences in your own mind. That's how I would put it to you. So some of us, I don't know about you, but many Western people from Western educated countries, more specifically than that, people that have fragmented families because of industrialization, we have just a nuclear family. And because of that nuclear family, we have attachments that get disturbed or disrupted, bonds that get interrupted. And that leaves us feeling extremely self-critical and alienated. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. So most of us have a very pronounced self-criticism inside of us. It likely would never lead to a kind of violence, but it does lead to a very subtle self-criticism that is in itself very painful. Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And most of us have lived our whole lives with this kind of very silent inner monologue that attacks us and chastises us and is unrelenting, and we are the recipients of our own lack of kindness. Do you follow? And that's why those teachings by Upal and my teachings by Godwin, in their simplicity, they are about acceptance and loving kindness with this inner monologue. And with this, and in so doing, they are the antithesis of violence. They are the kindness is an antithesis to that kind of inner violence. That self-acceptance is the antithesis of self-criticism, for example. So I just want to frame that for you as clear and as deliberate and as precise as you can be in applying the 5 precepts to the kinds of conditions and karmic formations and propensities that you have, the more benefit you'll get. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. As close as you can get to applying these 5 precepts, as long as they remain kind of 5 idealized virtues out there, I don't think much benefit will come. But the more that you can make them and adopt them as real practicalities, particularly as antidotes or remedies or departures for your own finely habituated tendencies, the better that the refuge becomes. The more meaning the refuge has, the greater benefit it will have. So the second precept will be stealing.
Taking what's not given.
So taking what's not given. Again, start to see these things not only as injunctions placed upon you in some monotheistic way that you were raised, like the 10 Commandments. Bob Thurman has a very nice way of talking about the refuge, and not only the refuge, but the precepts. He likes to call them the second skin. What does he mean by the second skin? The second skin is like your skin is there to protect you. And what is a second skin? The vows are there to protect your mind from falling into grooves that would inevitably bring about your own destruction or demise or dissatisfaction. Do you follow? So try not to think about I'm adopting precepts because someone thinks that this is a better way to live and now I have to follow the rules. No one's asking you to do this. You're not kids anymore. This is a free choice. And it's only meaningful if the free choice is taken with a deep understanding as to how the whole process works, how the mechanism works. If you don't understand the psychology, it's just belief. If you understand the psychology and you take ownership, then it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to protect your mind from your own self-criticism. It makes perfect sense to be more charitable or generous because of the momentum that merit will carry. It makes perfect sense not to objectify other people's bodies for your own sexual gratification, because you understand where the train track of, you've already indulged in that. You've already been the recipient of objectification and you know how that feels. You follow? So the second one is not stealing. Think about it on a gradation. Think about ways that you're not generous in your own life, that you don't practice generosity. You're stingy. Erica, you're not coming out. You're not sharing your voice. You're being stingy. We love your voice. We want you to share. You have amazing talents. Please share them. Is this your first refuge?
I did one about 12 years ago.
It didn't go so well? But maybe it was a seed to get you right here. Yeah, and if you're taking refuge the first time, you think it's a tremendous blessing, and you're planting seed, and you'll have the rest of your life and future lives to refine it and what it means and how to use it. So maybe that seed that was planted is now coming to full fruition. So now you're bringing it. You're stepping into. You can never step into the same stream twice, and now you're stepping into this stream with much more conviction and much more confidence. So share. So the third precept, lying. Okay. Tax time is going to come. We're all liars when it comes to taxes. Now I speak for myself.
That's right. Got that right.
We also lie to ourselves in ways. You can make this as extreme and as subtle as you like it. Part of becoming a Buddhist or taking refuge is recognizing this karmic cosmology, which is for most of us foreign, because we've been indoctrinated into scientific materialism, where there's no consequentiality, there's not even consciousness. So part of your refuge taking is really adopting a worldview in which you see infinite causality and infinite consequentiality. But that's profound, right? That's what wisdom is. It's adopting an entirely more realistic worldview. How reasonable is a scientifically reductionistic paradigm that suggests that once your brain dies, or there's no more electric activity in your brain, that there's no you anymore, there's no consciousness anymore, there's no soul anymore. Whereas this worldview understands that energy and consciousness never expire. There's no clemency. You can't get around your karmic activity. There's no hall pass. You can't get around it. You're always going to be the recipient of the things that you say, think, and do until you work it out. So that's why precepts are so powerful. You start to restrain the very causes of the inevitable kinds of distress that you really don't want to undergo anymore. And you start to put in place the kinds of seeds that will lead to more and deeper kinds of satisfaction, deeper kinds of openness, and eventually a more complete trait, let's say, rather than moments. Isn't it true that Upal seems like a more transformed human being? I mean, it could be projection, I grant you that. But if we hung out for him with 10 days, let's say, as I did Godwin and got to really see him, or you were on pilgrimage with Geshe Tenzin Zopa, or your own Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you can see that transformation is possible. That people who practice virtue, not just attention, but virtue, kindness, generosity, patience, tolerance, concentration, they become transformed. And maybe they still struggle, because he was very honest. He said, I'm still struggling, but the difference between him and I, or him and us, is what? What did he say? So I no longer, I accept the things that are happening. So there are still karmic formations ripening in his mind, but there's no more, there may be urges, but there's no more reaction. There's no more negative reaction. Or at least there's less negative reaction. I'm happy to go with less negative reaction. Fourth precept, sexual misconduct. Okay, we're lay people, so that will take on a completely new meaning. And if you just start to look very subtly at the intentionality, it may have something to do with being very respectful about another human being's body, another person's personhood, and not objectifying them for your own gratification, for example, taking advantage of them for your own pleasure, for example, or being the cause of a separation between two other individuals. You can think of all kinds of different manifestations that would be appropriate for that principle. And then the final one is
Intoxicants.
the intoxication of the mind. Okay, so this is the explicit use of drugs and alcohol that impair your ability to practice Dharma. So they like to say that you can take all the vows and practice them very nicely, but the moment you indulge in drugs and alcohol, you put yourself at risk of breaking all the other vows. Lying, stealing, being violent, sexually inappropriate. So think about if that's going to be something that you want to commit to. Now, here's one thing that maybe we haven't explained about the precepts is you don't have to take all 5. You can take refuge and you can adopt one of these precepts, because it's going to be just between you and who? Your consciousness. The whole bargain of the vow is between you and your own good conscience. So if you want to take, is that true, Chandama? We can take just one vow. You can take 5 vows. That's what's done in the Tibetan tradition that I'm familiar with. Can you choose how many vows you want to take?
Yeah, I mean,
Is he a monk?
he's everything.
Like I would personally
Recommend that you take all 5.
No, I mean we as a practice take 5, but because we keep taking it like sometime maybe 2-3 times a week, and we go to the
Maybe we
temple.
come
So
back.
for us, like it has become something like sort of so common because it happens all the time. And then like I think a couple of months ago we had this discussion, like when we were talking about these arrangements, I also said like maybe like depending on what they feel like that they can actually commit to themselves. I like personally think that I would like the fact that taking 3 precepts that I can actually
Keep.
realistically keep,
Yeah.
and then of course work my way towards the other two, not just to like do the easy way and just take 3 and that once you probably wouldn't get even a chance to break maybe. Rather than doing it, of course take 3 or 4 and then work your way, being more mindful that the next time, even if you break it, and try to do it better the next time, maybe not to break it and do it in a skillful way. So personally, I would
Encourage all 5.
No, I mean, I'm saying like what we normally do, but as personally, I really like the idea of like taking the number of precepts that you can actually really work.
Yeah, so sometimes between now and tonight, just think about your
Oh, wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
Pineapple, Jeffrey.
yeah.
So does that mean I can't ever have a drink again if I take the, or does it mean I can have a drink because I don't get out of control? I don't ever have a drink when I'm going to be doing my work. You know what I'm saying?
It will depend. I've heard it different ways given the refuge by who it's been given, and so we're going to have to there will be a lot of very precise questions, and I hope John Damobu will be there. I don't know if we'll have time to talk to the monks about it, but I've heard different variations like the precept of abstaining from alcohol can be as conservative as no more alcohol whatsoever, all the way to no more impairment.
Yeah.
Of course, that's a very slippery slope. So, but that's your choice. You know, if you enjoy one glass of wine and it doesn't impair your mind, and you can keep all the other precepts, and you want to hold yourself to that risk, and you feel like you have that much self-discipline. According to the person giving the vows or the precepts, that may or may not be an option. I don't know, but this is the way that it's been explained to me.
Do you know the story about the monk that was given the choice of which precept to break? Okay, so monk goes into the village, and the wife of a wealthy businessman sees him and invites him back to her place, and they have an animated Dharma discussion, and he notices that it's getting late and he needs to get back to the monastery. She runs to the door, she blocks the door. She says, "You're not leaving until you either have sex with me, kill the goat, or drink this jug of wine." And he's not going to kill the goat. And he certainly can't have sex with her because of sexual misconduct, and it would also be stealing because she's married. So he says the thing that would do the least harm is I'll just drink the wine here. So he drinks the wine, he has sex with her, and he kills the goat. Okay. Think of that story when you have your
There you go. That's hilarious. It's a good one.
So whatever the 5 precepts are, the more important thing that I think that you reflect on between now and tomorrow is not the abstract precept.
Try to get this
Oh, she hasn't taken her rounds yet. There's still time to kill.
Oh, look at him. See, that's the one you gotta watch out for, right? That one right there. Mm-hmm. You're the one.
Will this be a night of debauchery before?
It actually should be a night of purification. So one thing I'd like to recommend is that the 5 precepts, you start thinking about them in direct relationship to your own imprints. I always like to recommend that the 5 precepts or 8 precepts or the Bodhisattva vows get taken out of the idealized abstraction and nuance so that they fit some of your own tendencies, your own particular tendencies. And then I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to push or place or connect the refuge vows and commitments onto your Dharma wheel or onto your wheel of becoming. Because when the moment of recognition happens in your mindfulness, you will need to know what your new action is. And if it remains an abstraction, it's very hard to put it into practice. But if you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to start doing this every time I feel this way, I'm going to do this very particular thing. Does anyone have an example, a personal example that you feel like you can share?
the first reaction might be to have aversion and they're asking for money and not to give money, and then say, I'm not, in spite of my fear or whatever, I'm going to give something.
Good. So the urge is the result or the karmic ripening of past conditions. No way to change it in any given moment. So the moment of contact is seeing that homeless person. The next link is sensations. You have an unpleasant feeling, as just as you're seeing this person, you have an unpleasant feeling. Then the urge arises on the basis of that. Nothing you can do about that. And then the normal habitual tendency is to recoil. And you have a moment of mindfulness, and you have already thought and practiced at the holy sites and in your own mind and your own reflection the precept of generosity, or precept of virtue. The antithesis of not stealing is being generous. Just like through and through the Sri Lankans, with their beautiful smiles, are the embodiment of a well-oiled tradition and culture of generosity, let's say. How did they come that way? They come that way by the mechanism. The same mechanism that makes me a stingy person is the same mechanism at place that could make me a generous person. So the clearer we are and the more precise we are about where we're coming from and what we're working with and where we want to go, in that moment of recognition, we will have the actual tangible, practical choice that we want to, the seed that we want to plant. Do you follow? Mm-hmm. So that's why I encourage you to think about all 5 precepts. Think if you want to take all 5 precepts. Think if you can actually keep all 5 precepts. If it's not 5, then it's 4. Whatever number you decide, you decide that you can maintain with any goodwill and conviction and confidence and respect and integrity. One thing I really like about this group is so mature, so many years experience behind you, really wonderful maturity. Like when we took refuge at 20 in Bodh Gaya, it's hard to practice all those precepts when you're 20. But again, maybe just like Erica, that was a seed for much, much later. Whatever you decide, whatever precepts, the number, and you then make them personal, it's on you to try to maintain them. And that becomes your new life in a way, maintaining your precepts. This is why it's like, it's not a straitjacket that confines you. It reduces the choices to free you. I mean, if you're a triathlete and you want to go to Kona, you're going to be very picky about the food you put in your body. You're going to be very precise about your bedtime and your sleep. You're going to be very precise about the company that you keep, right? So fewer choices actually will help support your intention to win the race. And in this case, it's liberation. So I want you to think about that if you could. Keith.
I have a question about the killing. And I have it related to eating.
Yeah.
I think from a Jain viewpoint, obviously, you don't take anything off that's not fallen to the ground. And certainly, that's a different way of eating than, let's say, a vegan or a vegetarian, and I'm just wondering how that relates to the precepts.
Yeah, this is a good example. I had one class with Venerable Rabina, who's like a fiery, really fiery, you don't want to ask a silly question with her kind of person. And if you're a guy, you don't want to ask any questions whatsoever.
Yeah.
The thing is in samsara. Well, one of the criticisms that the Buddha had of the Jains is that they took their practice of ahimsa to an extreme. So the Jain Tritankas, are they Tritanka? Is that Tirtanka?
Tirtankas.
They would take their practice to such an extreme of nonviolence that they would end up essentially naked, standing in place with a cloth over their mouth, because they didn't want to even contaminate or defile or even kill any tiny creature. And they would eventually die standing in place, but they would be practicing perfectly their nonviolence. And the Buddha thought that that was an extreme. He actually went more for a middle way. And in this conversation I was having, or not conversation, but more of a one-way.
She was telling you.
She was saying, listen, like, even if you go veg, because you want to practice nonviolence and not eat meat, the rice that you gather and the fruits that you gather still harm other creatures that are in the fields.
Yeah, but that's a degree.
So then it is about degree and about intention, and that's why these four objects.
Inside you now.
The object of the animal, and the intention, and the action, and the completion. If all four are in place, it creates a very powerful or profound karma in both directions, positive and negative. But if they're not all there, so the Tibetans, and even the Tibetan monks, they eat meat because they live at such high altitude that there are not a lot of choices. But so they do a lot of purification practice. So they find a way to practice the precepts in context with the appropriate remedies and the appropriate intention.
I think they would take them to the Muslims to slaughter for who did the slaughtering.
Well, they hopefully are.
That's what I read. That
Humane.
the Tibetans didn't do the slaughtering themselves.
They
would
don't
take
do the
them-
slaughtering.
They would take them to a Muslim for that.
Anyway, it's one of those great examples of actually putting it on a light, like a film on a light board, and looking at it in detail and seeing that not any decision is as easy as it appears on the surface. Everything is very nuanced and complicated and interconnected, and it's never clear. It's never fully clear. Your intentions really do matter. There are purification practices and confessions that you can do because you're breaking your vows all the time. If you can even get through one day without breaking the precepts, unless you're Chandama.
I'd like to share a story.
Yeah.
Or even how the Native Americans, did their, how they went hunting and how they revered the animal and blessed the animal and
Mhm.
fed the animal and used every part of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's done in a sacred way.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to share a story that happened in the previous stupa. As you know, there were all those hawkers, and I sort of made a vow for myself about a year ago to stop being a hyper consumer and buying all these little trinkets or whatever, because my house is full of this stuff and I've been trying to get rid of it for decades. So there was this man who was very persistent, and I told him, I said, I'm not really interested, but I'm going to go around the stupa. And, I figured he'd go away by the time I got around, but he was still there. And I basically decided, look, he's doing this to make a living. Maybe he needs to feed his family and children. So I'm just going to give him money, and I'm going to ask for nothing in return. But he just wouldn't have it. And I wanted to give him 1,000, and he just looked at me. He's like, "No, I have to give you something." And this went on maybe a couple of times, and I said, "Okay, if you want to give me something, I'll take it." And I realized because I was wondering why he just didn't take my money, and it occurred to me he might have felt that his pride was being insulted, like he would come across as a beggar.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So instead of doing that, I needed to keep his pride intact. And I needed to let go of my need to be this non-consumer for that second. And this kind of ties in with the alcohol thing for me. Maybe this will allow you to still have that drink, but you will then think twice about having the second one. I sort of see it as a stabilizing force in your consciousness. So maybe that helps people. It's not an absolute. There's a lot of gray here, and it's a process, and it takes a very long time to get to the level of some of the higher teachers.
Feel the energy of this group. This is no coincidence we have come together. that we have done this countless lives together, and finally we have found refuge together today in this holy place with these sacred teachings. Unbelievable. Rejoice. Rejoice in the entryway of these newcomers into the fold, as daughters and brothers and sisters and sons of the Buddha, together now a new family, with new hope, renewed vision, a collective energy, a beautiful momentum now going forward in whatever rebirth that you take. We will always, always remember this moment. So breathe in together.